Good morning, everyone. To today's licensing committee. It's Friday the 20th of February. I am Councillor Emily Strudwick and the chair of the licensing committee. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts and assemble in front of the statue of Queen Victoria in Guildhall Square. Anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting is being live streamed. Please use the microphones and remember to switch them off when you have finished speaking, or the camera will stay on you. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly they do not wish to be recorded. Let's go round and do introductions. I will start. Let's start from the front. Let's do members first. If I start with.
I'm Councillor Lee Hunt, member of the Licensing Committee. Been around a bit, and I also help represent the ward of Nelson, which is Damshore, Tipner, Buckland, and North End.
Councillor Hugh Mason, Councillor for St Jude Ward.
Councillor Stuart Brown, representing Fratton.
Councillor Benedict Swan, Copner and Anchorage Park Ward.
Councillor George Mashwick, not been around as much as Lee Hunt, but, you know, time will tell, for the Paulsgrove Ward.
Councillor Jason Fazackley, ageing, Nelson Ward.
Councillor Russell Simpson, I look good for my age, Hilsey Ward.
Councillor Shah Gosham.
Councillor Yankaiteneuron, Charles Dickens Ward.
I'm pleased the committee are in high hopes today. Nikki.
Nikki Humphreys, licensing manager.
Julie Bound, senior accountant, finance.
And Jane Dodino, local democracy officer.
Thank you. We have no solicitor today, but Mr. Balfe is on the line if we need him. Apologies for absence for Councillor Oliver, Councillor Holder, and I know Shah and Kadir need to leave at 12:30, so that is noted. Yep.
Councillor Ashmore has asked me to pass on his apologies. He's been called into work late this morning.
Thank you. Members, any declarations of interest? No. Perfect. We'll go on to minutes of the previous meeting. Are we all happy as correct on record? Yeah. Perfect. Let's kick off with the review of licensing fees and charges.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. The report before you today is for you to consider a review of the fees that we charge for licences and registrations. These are administered by yourselves as the licensing committee and delegated obviously to the licensing service to retrieve. This review, however, doesn't take into account those fees and charges which have been set centrally by the government and therefore are outside of any consideration for reviews of the fees charged. The recommendations to you this morning, members, are that you note the contents of the report and approve the level of fees and charges that have been put before you this morning. The second recommendation is that any approved fees and charges won't come into effect until the 1st of April. So this is for the year 26-27 fee structure. And that would be subject to any fees that we are required to publicly advertise by way of statutory notice. And for your awareness, those fees relate to private hire or hackney carriage vehicles and private hire operators. So they are subject to statutory advertising. And obviously that you give authority to the officers to advertise those fees in accordance with those requirements. So members, you're in the background of the report. We have said to you that your cost recovery budget. That is your aim, that the costs associated with the licensing functions are met on a full cost recovery basis. We have included some guidance that the Local Government Association is Appendix A to help you more detail as to how these fees and charges are raised and what matters can be considered as reasonable expenditure associated with the licensing functions. Members, I don't really want, because I know you'll have all read the report and all of the associated appendices, but I just want to draw your attention to the fact that this is an inflationary only request for increase to maintain that we meet the budget for the licensing committee for 26-27. The only difference in relation to the fees and charges, I'm sure somebody will ask me, is the fees contained in Appendix 3B, where it talks about the proposed fees and charges and a retest fee for vehicles. Now, this is obviously, you can see that that is in excess of the inflation rate that we're asking, and that's simply because that fee now does not reflect the external recharge we get from the inspecting garage, so that adjustment has been to reflect fully those costs that are coming towards us from Adams Morey Garage. I have also set out, just to give a better understanding of how these increases could affect drivers and licence holders, and that is set out so you can see what the annual cost is per year and also what that actually means on a monthly basis and down to a weekly basis. And I'm hoping that that sort of adequately demonstrates that the fees are not of a level that is unreasonable or disproportionate to the cost of the licensing service. Members, I'll probably leave it as that for now, unless you've got any questions in relation to how those fees have been apportioned.
Thank you, Nikki. Members, does anyone have any? Yeah, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Nikki. Just a couple of hopefully quick and easy questions. Just looking at page 45 of the report, the Integrated Impact Assessment, it states on there that a consultation was run with members from the trade. Could you give us a brief overview of the sort of the rate of responses, the feel of responses from that consultation? And I've also got a question about, it states that the consultation didn't inform the proposal, which I think if there was a consultation, you'd think it would have done. Is there a particular reason for that, or can you just give us a bit of background and explanation on that, please?
Thank you. The information was shared in advance with the trade representatives, and I also had conversations with Tamas in relation to the driver rep for Uber. There was, the understanding was that it is just an inflationary increase. Overall, that didn't give rise to any concerns by those trade representatives, and I think that's probably demonstrated this morning that you have no deputations on this particular request. Perhaps with the impact assessment, it's very difficult with the form to actually explain further, but the priority for the licensing authority is that we meet cost recovery. So the fee inflationary rise was deemed to be reasonable and proportionate. And had there been concerns raised, then I'm sure that would have come to the committee today for you to take into account those representations. But because it is just an inflationary rate, we felt that it was a reasonable request to make of this committee.
Councillor Mason.
You've mentioned this is an inflationary increase. I notice the increase is at, what, 3.8%. Is that adequate for our needs, or will we be digging into back reserves to maintain the service at its current levels?
I've been reliably informed, Councillor, from our colleagues in the Finance Department, based on our current position, that that inflationary rise should keep us within budget for 26-27. I mean, obviously, in the situation we're in, I'm reliant on income to manage your budget. I'm reliant on numbers of licences to be granted in order to achieve that. But there are no indications at this time when you're setting the budget and when we're setting the fees that that situation is going to change.
Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, it's good to be nice and sharp, so we're not overcharging people. That's very good. And I've read the case law too. What I wanted to ask is a bit off-piste. So when I talk to taxi drivers, we talk about outside, so not the ones that we administer, but from Wolverhampton and other places that they might come from. Do they have any impact on the budget here? That, so for example, when people make complaints about them, do we start an investigation, or do they simply refer it straight up to Wolverhampton, or do we have any involvement at all, or is there any cost to us around those sorts of people?
If we were to take complaints about vehicles licensed elsewhere, that would obviously have a resource implication, and obviously that would have a financial effect on our budget. Because we don't have any income from licence holders licensed outside of the city, any complaints, we do advise members of the public how to contact that appropriate licensing authority for them to deal with the complaints. We don't get any payment, if you like, from other local authorities towards the cost of enforcement for our city. So that's why we enforce our licences and require those other relevant authorities to do their own enforcement.
Great. I mean, not great, but I understand. So basically, they're out with control, so far as we are concerned, and they don't have an impact on our budget. They just out there doing what they do, and they have to. And if there's any issues from other taxi drivers in our city who are looked after by us and vice versa, we just send them back up to. What happens then? You know, we could have people just roaming around doing weird stuff, and we wouldn't know all that much about it, I presume.
We have a data sharing agreement. There are underlying mechanisms for us to engage with other licensing authorities. We've got obligations under your safeguarding policy that if there are any complaints about drivers that necessitate action by the committee or officers, we have to share that nationally. We will investigate matters, so if we have vehicles that are licensed outside of the city, but they're plying for hire, so they're acting in contravention of the legislation, then it's incumbent on us as the licensing authority to investigate those matters. But the peripherals about, a driver, a complaint about a driver's driving standard or overcharging, that would be the matter for the home licensing authority.
So in a nutshell then, our taxi drivers and private hire are not subsidising in any way these people from all over the place at all when they make a payment to us?
No, absolutely not. Any fees and charges that we charge as a licensing authority are invested back into our licence. It doesn't have a broader remit than that.
Any other questions from members? No? I'll move on to comments then. Any comments? No? Okay.
Sorry, Chair, sorry. Just touch on Councillor Hunt. Is there any way that we can have some sort of charges for outside of personal taxi license holders? Because they're taking job from our taxi drivers. And we're not protecting our taxi drivers. Not enough, I don't see it.
We have no statutory authority to charge fees other than to those that we licence as a licensing authority.
So the aim of the game is to get Labour to sort the Deregulation Act, and then we wouldn't be in this issue. Well, I'm pleased with the fact there is a lack of deputations today, because I know it's hard, even any increase does affect the trade, and the fact that we've managed to keep it to inflation and even last year not have to raise it at all, I think it's great, and whatever we can do to help the trade is a win for me. So I'm going to go on each recommendation, if that's okay with the committee, just to approve. So first recommendation is that the Licensing Committee note the contents of this report and approve the level of fees and charges to be adopted. Are we all happy with that? And that the approved fees and charges will come into effect on the 1st of April 2026, subject to any fees that are required to be publicly advertised for a statutory period of 28 days? Yeah. And that the Director of Culture, Leisure and Regulatory Services be given authority to advertise, where applicable, such fees and charges that are subject to the formal statutory consultation process. Happy? Perfect. Okay, we move on to public consultation and recommendations for the best practice.
Chair, with your agreement, Julie was here to support the committee for the finance matter. Are you okay that?
Absolutely, you got away with it scot-free. Thank you for coming.
Members, so the second report on the agenda for you to consider today is in relation to the Department for Transport best practice guidance. Now, you will recall that you dealt with this last year and you instructed officers to go out to consultation on matters contained within that best practice guidance that weren't adequately or covered within your existing policy for taxis and private hire. That consultation took place between August and October. This report really is come back with those results and the general views that were submitted. The report contains the details of the consultation, overwhelmingly, in summary, in support of the best practice guidance, and therefore you have, as part of this report, a set of recommendations from 1 to 9, and that's in Appendix A, which asks you to determine whether you wish to make those amendments to your policy where you feel it's appropriate, and that we look at these amendments coming into the policy with effect from, again, 1st of April 2026. So, members, they're quite, the recommendations are quite supportive and positive. They look at inclusion mainly and accessibility, requests to introduce formally disabled access training for applicants to the trade. We are also looking at preparing an inclusive service plan so we can identify all of those measures that are in place, but we can document that in terms of one area of what the council is doing in relation to the taxi private hire trade and promoting accessibility within the transport fleet of private hire and hackney carriages. There is also, and I can say that I have been in touch with the Portsmouth Disability, or they have been in touch with me, the Disability Action Group, and they have offered their support and help to the licensing authority to develop that inclusive service plan, depending on, obviously, on whatever you determine today. There were other slight matters that you will see in the recommendations. We will start looking at disability awareness training, introduce the requirement with effect from 1st of April 2026. That will be for all new applicants who wish to have a driver's licence, and we will also implement it in those cases where complaints have been received about existing drivers, and that if there is an appropriate need to do so, we will require them to undertake disability awareness training. Just as a point of interest, on our driving assessments, we have the Blue Lamp Trust that provide that training to us, and they do also have a disability awareness training package. So that's something we can engage with that organisation if you wish to adopt that today. We've also asked whether operator licences, operator staff, private hire operators, and those people that take calls or deal with complaints via app-based systems, that they also receive some disability awareness training. It might need to be a bit tailored to the type of work that they do, which is going to be substantially different to drivers. But it's a more rounded view of that awareness within the taxi and private hire trade. Age limits for drivers, in terms of they must have 2 years experience of driving before you will permit them to be licensed. That's had overwhelming support from the consultation. In fact, can I say, members, all of the consultation, everybody was in agreement with these recommendations, but I'm sure if you've got any questions, you will cover that. I could go, you've got another 2 recommendations, but members, it's really over to you if you've got any questions about specific recommendations.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Chair. Just curious, Nikki, previous consultations, have we ever done a previous consultation before?
I think I'm always doing Councillor Simpson consultations. Yes, this is like the last point, if you like. You've obviously done policy consultations, adaptations to policy for safeguarding, which is a statutory requirement. So we've done that and our policy has been adapted. We reviewed last year the main components of your policy, which in the main is compliant. These were those residual matters. So yeah, our policy is we say we will review it every 5 years, but at the moment it's a state of flux. If we have best practice guidance, we will always come back to you to review the policy.
But specifically in this literal area here of getting the feedback with taxis, I mean, what I'm trying to get at is, compared to other consultations, is this a very good turnout in comparison to previous years?
In comparison to previous years, yes, it has been a very positive outcome. I think the last one we did was probably about 300, 400 responses. I think that was in terms of the safeguarding. But this one has elicited a considerable, probably the most I've ever seen in my role.
So good, over 100%. Over 100% increase in turnout. That's really, really good. So basically from that data then, you know, you've probably got quite a definitive view on what you feel needs to be improved. And was this, and obviously, even though obviously a lot of the taxi unions would have given the feedback from doing that, has there been like any feedback from the data that's collected, like kind of like a aftercare of the data that you've got, if that makes sense?
As I said, I have been in, yes, I've had engagement with some of the persons that have contributed to that consultation. That involves a large operator, private hire operator within the city, and that engagement will continue depending on the outcome of your decisions today in terms of how that policy is to be implemented within the trade. As I said, Portsmouth Disability Action Group have also been in touch to work together depending on the outcome of the meeting today. So yes, there is engagement, there is definitely engagement with those bodies that can assist the committee.
Just out of curiosity, because obviously when it, you know, the question asked, do you think the licence policies should be updated? Obviously it was overwhelmingly over 50% in favour. There was a very small 12% of no. Was there any, what were their reasonings for that came back?
The only reasonings that I had were where there was a free opportunity to put sort of comments in relation to that. They're obviously contained within that document as well. So I haven't been able to drill down any further as to why there would have been a negative to the question.
And final question at the bottom of 4.2, obviously, we get the government kind of guidelines, and you can see the graph there. It's all very encouraging, isn't it? I mean, you got 70%, nearly 90% of all of do you support the idea of the policy setting out the licensing authorities' aims and commitments around? And obviously, clearly, very the taxi and the private taxi hires are very, very confident with the council. Would that be right in saying that?
I would hope so.
We're not getting any boos from that side of the room. So, Councillor Adeniran.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question from Councillor Simpson. The data, I just want to know the method you used to collect this, the surface from them. So do they understand what this means when, during the consultation with them?
Yeah, the consultation and the questions were driven, by the actual best practice itself, what were we trying to achieve. So there was an understanding this is what we were consulting on, and the questions were specifically written to show this is the ideal position. How do you feel about that? The survey was undertaken in a wide variety of sources, so it was on social media, but the main drive of it was through, we had a survey monkey that we sent out to every single licensed operator, driver, Hackney carriage drivers, Hackney carriage providers. So each and every person involved with the taxi and private hire industry were personally written to say take the survey, and we also engaged with relevant groups that represent those with disability needs, as well as yourselves as councillors and MPs. So, and members of the public obviously had that opportunity. And when you look in the report, you can see that some of the comments, that the free comments, that they do look as if they could be comments back from members of the public. So I think the reach was broad, Councillor, in terms of getting out to find out what people's views were.
Councillor Mason.
2 questions so I can understand how this will actually work. On recommendation 4, there will be compulsory training for existing licence holders where there is a justified need. Who judges whether there's a justified need, and how will it be enforced? How will it be applied? And on recommendation 6, there was obviously quite a lot of concern about the number of years of driving, and you've decided on 2, but there was a question about people whose driving experience in those 2 years is out with the United Kingdom. How do you judge whether they have got a clean record out with the United Kingdom?
So in terms of for existing licence holders, that I would say is a broad between your officers and the committee itself. We may get a complaint from a member of the public that perhaps a driver did not have sufficient awareness of disability needs that could be rectified by a person attending training, which delegation could be to officers that do that. And equally, if a matter came before the licensing subcommittee, you would have that in your measures that you could take into account. Rather than, say, suspending a licence, would it be a better proportionate approach, more reasonable to require training?
So this can be initiated in some circumstances by members of the public complaining.
Oh, absolutely, it would be driven. It would be driven by that, Councillor. And the other issue is...
The other issue is the 2 years for drivers who have not had 2 years within the United Kingdom. Yeah. How do you judge that they've got a clean licence?
We do a number of checks on drivers as part of the onboarding process. So when they apply for a licence, they are required to produce their driving licence and a driving licence summary. The legal requirement is that a person has to, so that there's a statutory provision that says you can't have a taxi or private hire badge unless you've held a full UK or EEA driving licence. So if somebody has got a driving licence from outside of the UK EEA, I'm just trying to think of a country that I know isn't. So I think, no, it's going to go out mad. But if they're non-EU, then any previous driving experience won't be considered because we have to keep to the statutory requirement. And so those checks have to be done in terms of the entitlement. If there are any offences, motoring offences, you have within your policy at the moment how those applications will be considered. So a one-off motoring offence might not lead to a refusal or a revocation, but a combination and numerous motoring offences may take a different path because that might suggest that there is the skills lacking in terms of being safe and a competent driver.
Councillor Hunt, did you have a question?
Thank you ever so much. So when you read the comments and the respondents to this, I mean, it's pages and pages of comments about Wolverhampton drivers, ever so many. There's the odd one about bus lanes and so on, but that is the thing that's, and I'm not surprised there's the increase in replies because people are really, that is the burning issue, isn't it? When you get into a taxi, you get into a Portsmouth taxi, they start talking about these other drivers, and I don't blame them one bit. You know, what more can be done? Maybe we'll talk about, I know you touched on it just now, about what more can be done to control this, because it's just not fair on the drivers here in Portsmouth to have to compete with these taxis that, in my opinion at least, are substandard to what we demand here. I mean, there's one comment in there looking for a topographical test again, because when you get in some of these people, the taxis that have been plated elsewhere, they haven't got a clue where they're going. They rely on sat-nav and so on. So, you know, it is a real big problem. I mean, they say they push people into poverty, and they flooded the city with drivers elsewhere. And I strongly believe that we're one of the most efficient licensing teams in the country. Can something be done to remove Wolverhampton City Council licensed PHVs, as I don't believe other drivers are regulated properly? So, you know, they're looking at us, the people who do business here and are registered here and licensed here, are looking for us to stand up for them against these, all these other drivers from, not from Wolverhampton, but are licensed in Wolverhampton. What can be done about it? Is it just we need a change in the law, as the chair says? We've got to get this deregulation, which every government seems to go after all the time, over all sorts of things, from planning through to licensing. What can be done? Does it worry you? Does it concern you? Are the drivers really cross about it? Do they go on at you about it, for example?
It is a national problem, Councillor, in terms of how cross-border hiring has been able to develop over the years, and technology that exists now for private hire operators, and how you can book a private hire vehicle. It is being looked at by the government at the moment. There was a select committee consideration of this matter in the last few months. The government have now issued a consultation in terms of where should licensing of private hire and hackney carriages sit in a future government, and they're currently asking whether regional governance through the Regional Transport Authority is a better place for licensing of taxi and private hire than sitting locally within the council itself. That's still under consultation. That doesn't end until April this year. But I think the government are certainly aware of the issues and the issues of cross-border hiring, and they are trying to look at how they tackle that people stay within local areas. But we'll await to see. But what I would say is that yes, we have a policy, and our policies may be different to other councils. That's your role as a licensing committee to decide what's best for your area in terms of what you want to see in your policy. But there are statutory minimums as well. So in terms of a driver licensing, let me use Wolverhampton because it's used. They will have to be subject to the same checks that we do. We have to check for their criminal history to an enhanced level. We have to check their driving licenses. We have to check their right to work. This is all statutory, and whether they're licensed here or any other place, there are minimum requirements that we have to do as a licensing authority. And in that way, they're similar. But obviously, councils, you make your own policies, and Wolverhampton have probably a different policy in dealing with applications, as would Fareham, as would Gosport. So it's a regime that perhaps it obviously needs to be revisited based on the way that taxis and private hire can operate now.
Just followed through. But when you talk to Mr. Young and other taxi drivers, they say it's harder here. The standards are higher, so it's harder, but they continue to get plated here because I think it brings an advantage to their business. Say we are Portsmouth taxis or Portsmouth private hire, but they say it's harder here than compared to getting done in Wolverhampton or wherever else. Is that fair?
I've looked at the Wolverhampton policy, and there's close alignment to an extent with what you require. The main difference is we require mandatory CCTV in Portsmouth licensed vehicles, and that's not a stance adopted by other licensing authorities, and that has a cost implication in itself. But we've had that policy in Portsmouth since 2016.
And very briefly then, Chair, and I think it's good. I mean, the Portsmouth taxi drivers know that their CCTV safeguards them as well as their passengers, and I think passengers, particularly women, are wise to this, so they avoid the other hire or taxi vehicles. But I have, for the life of me, absolutely no idea why this isn't a statutory obligation at all. So there we are.
Councillor Madrick.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, going on from what Councillor Hunt said, as you know, this has been a passion of mine. Sorry, Nikki, I know she's laughing because this has drove me crazy for years. And as you know, I wrote a paper for the LGA as well on this particular topic, which obviously went before the committee, which was accepted and great. And I think, I welcome the Casey report. I mean, as you know, the government's Casey report did highlight cross-border licensing as a significant risk to prevention of harm against children and obviously drug trafficking, etc. There is a real big problem with this, and government are listening, which is welcomed. And I think, Nikki, if we could share around the government consultation to members here to see if we can encourage other people to feed back in, especially councillors, to feed back in personal experiences and private hire drivers, taxi drivers, etc. That would be good as well. Absolutely welcomed entirely. Obviously, Councillor Hunt brought the topographical tests up, which I think we got rid of in 2023, maybe, if I remember rightly. But just moving on from that, I think that, and this question thing, I assume that Wolverhampton don't have topographical tests because no one would know where they're driving because it's Wolverhampton. and they don't drive in Wolverhampton. So I assume that obviously if we did implement it in our council, it would make no difference to the outside authorities as in relation to Wolverhampton. It wouldn't stop them driving, would it? No. So
No.
And when the topographical tests were in Portsmouth, obviously they were in for much longer. Were they popular amongst our drivers, or because obviously the DFT guidance does recommend that we do them. So it doesn't anymore. It used to, didn't it? It changed.
Yeah,
So-
just
so-
to clarify.
Yeah, go on, clarify.
And there is a question perhaps that you might want to look at as recommendation 7. The best practice guidance advises against topographical tests for private hire drivers. But they do say there may be an argument for using it for Hackney Carriage, because Hackney Carriage, I think the argument was, well, private hire it'll be pre-booked, so therefore they'll know the destination in advance. This is not my justification. This is, I think, the judgment within that best practice. But with taxis, with taxi drivers, Hackney Carriage, you just hail them down, and should there be an expectation within the Hackney Carriage fleet that they should know and have an awareness of locations. But technology as it is, a lot of reliance now is on sat-nav, and certainly introducing for private hire would be contrary to the
And
best.
a question for you, Chair, really, and I'm sorry to do this, but like, obviously Councillor Hunt brought up Wolverhampton, it's a bugbear of mine, and for years since I've been a councillor, I've been fighting for this, and even when Councillor Fazakerley to my right here was Chair, we put through motions in council, we put questions through council to force the licensing department to give us a full review of the differences between Wolverhampton to see what we can do. We're 3 years on from that request now. We've had multiple questions as reminders. As I say, it was under Councillor Fazakerley's licensing regime that we did it, and since then you've been in for 2 years and we've still not got it, and I've been assured that we're going to get it. We still haven't had it. When are we going to get a full report on Wolverhampton taxi drivers in this city, including the differences, and when are we going to do a awareness campaign for residents to protect residents from this? Because you know all yourself as well, we have it at the time, we get reports of sexual violence in taxis, we check the CCTV and we find out people are liars. So it doesn't just protect the taxi drivers, it protects the passengers as well. People in Wolverhampton taxis are simply not protected as well as people in Portsmouth taxis, that's a fact. And I know operators hate me saying that, but it's factual. I honestly think people that drive Wolverhampton taxis in Portsmouth are doing it for precarious reasons, because I don't see why you'd want to get licensed in Wolverhampton when you can be in Portsmouth. So I think after 3 years now of motions going through and questions going through, I would like an answer on behalf of this committee when we are finally going to get this report, because it's been too long.
Okay. Nikki, how long do you think you need to do a report like that?
Members, I can email you this afternoon the policy of Wolverhampton licensing policy that is available online. I can direct you to that policy immediately. In terms of the distinctions, members, I apologise if there has been a delay. I hope you appreciate the work of your licensing service in terms of coming back to you constantly with matters of policy for Gambling Act, Licensing Act, Hackney Carriage, private hire, has kind of moved my priorities under statutory requirements. But Councillor Majerick, if I will send that out to members immediately after this meeting so they can review the policy themselves for Wolverhampton. If you want a report specifically on those distinctions for one particular council, then I'm happy to bring that forward so the committee can note that.
Yeah, I think, Chair, we need it. It was requested through full council. It's a full council decision that we get a report through the licensing committee on the differences. It's all well and good us councillors knowing the difference. Most of us sitting here do know the differences. That's not the point of what we're asking for. We want it in a public forum so that the public are fully aware of the differences and the risks that they take when stepping in a Wolverhampton vehicle.
I think if we do that before we go into pre-election, before the end of this year, would that work for you? Yeah, we could do that. So, when is pre-election period? 21st. Yes, that's fine. I think we can get that done if everyone's happy to get that done, because I understand that I'm having the same conversation with people all the time about the differences and simple things like the plate test, and that doesn't exist in Wolverhampton. So it is important, and we do need to get people to understand that. And I know that the end of last year we also spoke about the differences between Gosport, Fareham and Havant, because there's differences, and we were looking at local government reorganisation. But I think the main factor here is the Wolverhampton, and it's quite important to get that through so that we can talk about it. So if we look at doing something before pre-election so that we can get it perfect. Councillor Hunt, you had
Good luck with getting it before that. I was going to say to you, oh yes, so yeah, you're right, everybody's right. Openness and transparency is really important for customers and for the trade. But I think it also just goes to show, no matter how much we say it won't, there is a cost which would be borne by the taxi drivers, because everything licensing does is paid for by taxi drivers. So it's only a small cost, but it does get, when Miss Humphreys looks into this, that is a cost. Her time is a cost, and officers' time was a cost. So we will be looking at Wolverhampton and expecting this back at some time, probably come afterwards, to be honest. And so there are costs involved in looking at Wolverhampton, so it's not correct to say that it doesn't have any bearing on us. It does. Some costs do fall on us when we start looking around like this, but it's the right thing to do.
You have no faith that we'll get it done before. Councillor Swan.
Are we actually lobbying Wolverhampton, either individually or as part of a group of other councils, to basically look at best practice? It just seems to me, obviously, this has been going on for a number of years now, where we're talking committee, we're talking about reports and everything, but there's a real safeguarding issue here. And as many people who know about the situation, there's others that don't. And so, we really need to be putting the pressure on them and saying, well, we have a moral imperative to look after our residents, and all the while that this is an issue and we're not taking the lead and saying to them, you need to be looking at your processes, it's an issue. I mean, I don't know why Wolverhampton don't want to improve their systems, but they need to, and we should be putting pressure on them to do so.
I'm just going to jump in there. I think it's as much, obviously we're all focused on Portsmouth and Wolverhampton, and actually I did an LGA course for licensing, and let me tell you, every single council that is not Wolverhampton are complaining about Wolverhampton, and they are trying to do everything they can to come together to try and find ways that they can fix this, because it's not just a us problem, it is a national thing, and that's why I think we are kind of lobbying the government. And it looks like when I bring my motion in March that there's going to be full support in this room for that, and that will show our stance. But yeah, I just wanted to touch before Nikki responded. Let me make it clear that every single council that I spoke to when I did that course complained about Wolverhampton. It's not just us.
Chair.
Nothing to add, Chair.
Kadir.
Sorry, Chair. Just don't know if that's relevant or not. How does average a customer who uses taxi know which taxi they're getting into? Is that Portsmouth or Wolverhampton one? How would they know that?
I'm just going to jump on that as well. If they order from Uber, it obviously says that it's a Pompey taxi. You run the risk when you are calling, and I have refused certain private hire drivers because they are not Portsmouth. I won't get in it. I mean, that's a simple stance if people want to start taking that. I have recommended that to residents as well. If it's not Portsmouth, don't take it, because at least you'll be safe. And I think that's the best way we can kind of advise from that. Councillor Madrick.
Hopefully our Democratic reporter to my left, Toby, has made a note that the chair of licensing has just said, if it's not Portsmouth, don't get in it. I think that's a good line to take, and I think that will give it some of the exposure that it actually needs. I think That's one of the things we need to look at in the report as well, Chair. If it comes through before or after PERDA, we'll see what talents and skills you and Nikki have together to make that happen. I think Lee's challenged your ability, so let's see what you can do. But I think that's one of the things we've got to look at. I think Kadir's right. You know, awareness. How do we tell residents? We know, but this once again is how do residents, general public know? So I think we need to look at an awareness campaign. Look, we might not be able to do anything about the legalities of Wolverhampton drivers driving in our city. What we can do is deter, and we can do that through a campaign of awareness, social media, direct mailing if we have to. If people stop stepping into Wolverhampton taxis when they arrive, people will stop being licensed by Wolverhampton taxis because the operators will soon want to change their methods if we're proactively saying don't step in them. But I'm so glad you just said that line, and I do hope our democracy report has just got that, because that's a headline.
Members, I'm going to draw you back to the report. Is there any more questions or comments on the recommendations?
Sorry, just to clarify, because again, just for recommendation 7, I think any other conditions are quite supportive, but recommendation 7 hasn't got a recommendation as such, other than for you to consider whether you want a topographical test for Hackney carriage drivers. That is best practice. However, we did review this in 2023, and we did feel that the other aspects of the training that they get, the driving assessments, the safeguarding test requirements, that the topographical was perhaps something that wasn't integral to Hackney carriage drivers. But you may want, obviously, to review from 2023, has the situation changed? We've seen a marked reduction in Hackney carriage drivers and Hackney carriage vehicles, and really for you to consider whether that requirement could further restrict the market if we were to introduce a topographical test again.
Of course.
I mean, and Councillor Magic touched on it, and I mentioned it because something needed to be pulled out, and I don't think so, because it's just not fair. You know, we require a higher standard of drivers here in Portsmouth than registered elsewhere. So unless they're going to do it elsewhere as well, it just isn't fair on our drivers, and I don't think it's right. And I think our drivers know the area anyway, and as you say, SatNav is there. So it's just something else for our drivers to be concerned about. So, no, as far as I'm concerned.
Councillor Hunt, I think you've just sent Mr Young into a grave with the head shaking there. Councillor Madge.
Well, I was just going to say, look, I use this word lightly, don't clip this on anyone. I'm a Democrat by heart, not a Liberal Democrat, a Democrat by heart. I do believe in democracy. That the consultation response does say yes, that people prefer it, but I mean, I would like to refer, if possible, Chair, with your permission, to our rep in the room for this actual department. Sorry to put you on the spot, but at the end of the day, if he's here and he's the rep for it, I'd like to hear from him, if with your permission, if he'd like to speak. I'd like his opinion on whether he thinks it should or shouldn't be brought back, because the responses say that it should. I have no preference personally.
Members, are you all happy for Mr Young to speak? Yeah? Go for it, Viv.
Fire away. What's the question, Councillor George?
Do you or do you not think that topographical tests should be reinstated for your taxis, Hackney carriages?
Yes, it's in with Hackney carriages, but I think it also should be introduced for private hire. Nikki said earlier on that usually a private hire driver knows where he is going before he gets the job, so he'll be able to plan his route. Many jobs come through on a private hire. It would be a pickup, for argument's sake, in North End going to Southsea. It's a big place, it doesn't help. Or it could be a restaurant, table 10. See a restaurant, see the staff. The driver, on many occasions, doesn't know where he's going. I personally think the topography test should be reintroduced for Pompey private hire drivers, as well as the Hackney carriage drivers. If you wanted me to talk about Wolverhampton, I do, when I get a car, either if I'm near a taxi rank, I go to a taxi rank. If I'm out in the wild somewhere, out in the sticks, I'll get one off Visu, off the app. Many times it turns up as a Wolverhampton licensed private hire vehicle. And if I said the driver, I'm being polite by saying the driver is totally clueless, absolutely clueless as to where they're going, and their driving standards are abysmal. Anything else, George?
Thank you, Viv. Councillor Madrick.
So with that in mind, Chair, as I say, 78% of people do want it back. Our trade rep here does say he wants it back. As I say, I'm impartial, but as I say, I'm a Democrat, and I think that if we've had the biggest responses ever, 496 responses, and they've said yes, then I'd like to formally propose that we do bring topographical tests back for Hackney carriages, and hopefully I've got a seconder to my right. Yes. I think Councillor Fazakerley.
Yeah, happy to second, Chair.
Thank you. Can I just ask, is there a cost implication for the topical? Okay. Do you know what that is?
As a guide, I'm just checking on the new fees, but I think for the English test that we provide, it's £22. But I'd have to look at the cost of setting it up, and we rely on learning and development to help us with the form. But yeah, it's not going to be, I wouldn't imagine, but there is a cost.
No problem. So that was proposed by Councillor Madrick and seconded by Councillor Fazakerley. Are we all happy with changing to topical? Yeah. Okay, any other comments before I go through the recommendations? No? Okay, so that the Licensing Committee considers the recommendations number 1 to 9 in the report attached as Appendix A and duly determines amendments to the PCC policy as it considers appropriate, which we have obviously amended number 7 to include now the testing. Again, which was proposed by Councillor Madrick, seconded by Councillor Fazakerley. We all agreed on that? Perfect. And that the proposed amendments to the policy will come into effect on the 1st of April 2026. Yeah? Perfect. Now we are going to move on to Town Police Clauses Act. Oh, God.
I've had a call. I need to go home.
No
Sorry.
problem. Thank
Sorry
you.
about that.
That's no problem at all. Councillor Hunt, thank you for attending. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the last report before you this morning, members, is looking at Hackney carriage vehicles and quantity controls. And this is something, again, that does form part of the best practice guidance, but taken separately because it is a matter of how we regulate Hackney carriage, availability of vehicle licences in the city. The report is really asking for you to give consideration in terms of how you wish your current policy to progress. At the moment, you limit the number of Hackney carriage vehicle licences. You're entitled to do that under the Transport Act. However, converse to that is the best practice guidance that we've been talking about suggests that councils shouldn't regulate the amount of Hackney carriage vehicle licences, and as the report sets out, there's procedures you have to follow. So if you wish to retain a numerical limit on the amount of Hackney carriage vehicle licences, then you must conduct a survey to establish whether there's any unmet demand that you're not serving with the limitation on the plates. If you decide that no, you don't want to keep those numerical limits anymore, then you don't have to do a survey. It's only if you're seeking to restrict licences that you would need to undertake what they call an unmet demand survey, the cost of which would be reflected in the cost of the Hackney Carriage licence fees, because again the cost recovery on commissioning those sorts of transport reports that the taxis only would have to cover any associated costs. To give you, the report again shows you where we are with our fleet at the moment and where we have been static, but it also does give you some background information in terms of where we are with the current numbers of vehicle licences or Hackneys that are actually operating or licensed at the moment. You can see that there's been a decline, and we have got a number of licences just sitting in the office because either people don't want to be in the trade, or perhaps the difficulty with availability of wheelchair accessible vehicles is becoming an economic issue, that people aren't prepared to invest in those vehicles. But I would propose that any consideration of whether you want to remove numerical controls at some point, and obviously this is subject to consultation before we can make that decision, but it should still retain the issue of wheelchair accessible vehicles, because if you remove that requirement, then I think you would see no wheelchair accessible vehicles on the fleet whatsoever. So maintaining that requirement gives you a fleet of some sorts of wheelchair accessible vehicles. So, members, it's really over to you as to instruct your officers how you wish to proceed with the issue of quantity controls, and we will undertake the relevant consultation on the preferred option of the committee this morning.
Members, any questions? Councillor Brown?
Chair, I'm not 100% certain that I'm able to make a decision on this without having some data about demand levels. Obviously, it's very easy for us to have data on how many licences we've got, how many are taken up, what percentage are wheelchair accessible, but we don't know whether that decline is due to something emanating from the licensing department, whether it's emanating from demand, whether there's some external factor. So I would wonder if it's possible for us to get some data from the public about usage and demand, maybe work with the taxi operators as well to look at waiting times, to look at how many of their drivers are fallow at any given time, and then maybe come back and make a determination on this with that data available to us. Obviously, at the moment, I believe our wheelchair accessible requirement is a percentage of the Hackney vehicles, is that right?
We have a two-tier fleet, so and I think the graph in the report shows you historically how that number's been derived. So you have the two tiers, you've got 150 plates out of 234 that can be wheelchair accessible, can be saloon, can be an estate. So you've got a fleet that says it can be any vehicle. And then from 2007, you amended your policy to increase from 150 to 234, but that any vehicles above those original 150 had to be wheelchair accessible.
Because obviously, just thinking about the maths of it, if we take the cap off altogether and have an uncapped number of Hackney vehicles, if we still want to maintain a requirement for any of them to be wheelchair accessible, it'll have to be a fixed number of wheelchair accessible vehicles in the city at any given time. You can't do it as a proportion of an uncapped number.
It would really depend on what decision the committee make, whether they just, again, having regard to the best practice guidance, having regard to the current situation that we are in with availability of Hackney carriage vehicles in the city, you could introduce a fixed number. So you could say we'll have another 20 plates, but those have got to be wheelchair accessible, or you can just say, as accords with the best practice guidance, don't have it. And then the market decides itself where it is measured if there's demand. But the difficulty we've got is wheelchair accessible vehicles are expensive. And that, I think, and again, if the chair wishes to take a trade view, I'm no expert, but my view as an officer is that we have seen a depletion in the fleet because the investment needed on wheelchair accessible vehicles has seen a decline. And even if you increase the numbers, that's no guarantee that we will have more vehicles of wheelchair accessible. There's a pattern of we're reducing rather than seeing a rise. The rise in vehicles is in private hire.
Councillor Madrick.
I was just going to say, I agree with Stuart, it's hard to make a decision without actually having the data, but I think Jason was first. So
Councillor Fazackley.
Did you call me Councillor Hunt then?
I said, oh,
right,
Councillor Fazackley.
Gosh, okay.
I mean, I know they look alike.
All of your hands went up at the same time, so I didn't know which one first.
Well, yeah, Nikki went on to say sort of what I was going to say there, but I think, again, it's useful to have the views of our taxi reps if they could give a little bit of input to us without wishing you to do our jobs for us. But Councillor Brown asked for some data, but can you give us your view, please?
I'm going to make sure you two are down for deputations next time. Viv.
Thank you. I came in as a Hackney carriage driver in 81. I've done private hire before that. In 81, there was 100 Hackneys, all saloon. In 86, it went out to 150 saloon. In 89, Nikki, am I correct? They deregged, and there was 84 people took that option up between 89 and 97. There's all London-style cabs, either the FX or the Metro cab. After 1997, correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, on the dates, they put a cap on it, survey carried out, no significant unmet demand. In those days, you used to come out as a Hackney carriage, you used to get flagged in the street, there weren't the mobile phones, there weren't the apps, there weren't the buses with the BSIP being subsidised, buses every 2 minutes everywhere. So now, over the last few years, there's been a massive decline in the requirements of Hackney carriages. You used to sit in Edinburgh Road, get jobs down to Queen Street, down to Portsea. Now you've got a bus every 2 minutes, no work there. Sit down to Harbour Station, there's buses every 2 minutes going everywhere. People's there on the apps, getting Uber, getting Vizu, and there's gradual decline. There's now, I think the figures, there's 37 licensed wheelchair vehicles out of 84 at the moment. Does that not tell you something? There is no demand for wheelchair vehicles. No one is going to outlay, no one in their right mind will outlay £40,000-50,000 to buy a wheelchair accessible vehicle, sit on a Harbour Station for an hour, get £6, £8, a tenner going up the road. It does not add up. And I've done the job another month, it's 50 years of doing this job and being involved in it. I know, I'm hands-on, I talk to drivers all the time, I know what's happening, I'm in the real world. We've had there's a lot more things Pompey Council could do to help promote the taxi industry. Everything, not necessarily licensed department, but there's a lot of negativity towards the taxi industry. When they have for argument's sake, when they have the South Sea Victorious Festival on, we're chucked off the taxi rank for their buses to park. You want a taxi rank, Jason's full aware of this, 10 years to get it. You want a bus lane, it's advertised as a TRO in July last year for New Road, Kingston Road southbound. It's already got approved 2 weeks ago, it's been approved by Mr. Peter Candlish. That's approved. In 6 months, that's approved. You want a taxi rank, it takes forever to be done, and there's always some feeble excuse. You can't have this, can't have that, don't want this, don't want that. Even Albert Road rank now, that's been moved, okay, you've got to repair the King's Theatre. You've put it back behind the disabled base, not marked out, so it's continually full of private cars. Giving them a ticket doesn't solve the problem, because they don't care about 30 quid ticket. We can't park on the taxi rank. The guys might come down, your CEOs might come down and give tickets, that does not solve the problem. But
Thank you, Viv. That is definitely directed at Mr. Peter Canlish rather than this committee, but thank you,
So
noted.
just to confirm, the only question I've got now, because that kind of answered the question I did have. So in one word, do you prefer to retain the limits or do you prefer to remove the limits? Just one answer.
You've got to clarify, retain the limit on wheelchair or retain the limit on saloon?
As a whole.
Well, if you deregulate as a whole, anyone in their right mind who's got a wheelchair vehicle, when they went to replace it, it would be replaced with a saloon one. Thank you.
Councillor Simpson?
I don't know if this would be helpful for Councillor Brown, because he mentioned about data, but obviously on the previous agenda we had we've literally had a consultation, and it does actually mention 57 people responsible customers with disability or limited mobility, as well as obviously private hires also given their opinions. And I know on page 65 and 67 there's also a kind of a in favour for more training in that area, but I'm just wondering if that actually might, you know, that is the data's there basically, so I'm just wondering if we use that data to kind of reinforce this.
I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Simpson, that data is there in some respect, but I think from the consultation that was done in relation to that agenda item, the majority of the responses came from the trade side, which is very useful information to have. I would also like to see more data from residents and customers as to their perceptions of the demand, because right now I do not know how many people on a weekly basis want to use a wheelchair accessible vehicle to know whether or not the amount that we have is suitable for it.
To my knowledge, me and Nikki have had discussions about this, and the problem is just because there's wheelchair accessible vehicles doesn't mean they're going to be on the road, and therefore they always feel that it's not being met, because you can't force the drivers to be out at the right at that time, nor can they generally pre-book for it either. So even if it's there, you can't guarantee them drivers working, because they're self-employed, they can work when they want. And that's always been a problem, no matter what, when you try and ring them, it doesn't mean they're working. So I don't know if that helps, or if there's anything you want to... Councillor Simpson.
The consultation was a public one, and I'm pretty sure you know, you reached out to disability groups, and so to get their feedback anyway. And you know, I think considering we've had like 100% plus turnout more than usual, I think maybe, even though it might say 7%, it might not seem a lot, but if it's come from the right people that work in that sector, then you know that information and opinions is gold, really.
Councillor Madrick.
You're not going to believe I'm going to say this, but for once I'm really struggling to have an opinion on this. That's not like me, is it? I honestly have no idea in any capacity what is the best option here. I have not a clue of what to do. I have no idea whether it's better to retain the limits or remove the limits or do a... I have absolutely not a clue or foggiest what the best recommendation is on this one. So I think I would like a real steer from officers on this one. I know it's a decision on the councillor's part, but I'm really struggling here. I don't know if any other councillors feel the same, to know what the... Yeah, we all are nodding. We're struggling to know what the best option is here. I don't think that and this is no disrespect, but I just don't feel that we've got enough detail in this report to be able to come to an opinion conclusion. So I think I'm going to probably take the advice of the officer on this one and go with whatever the officer believes is the best option, because I genuinely have no idea.
Nikki, did you want to respond before, or... It's all right. That's fine, I'll go to Stuart Brown, sorry.
Thanks. So, Nikki, can I ask one question before you answer that? And that is, if we were to choose to follow DFT guidance for best practice and deregulate, does that prevent us from re-regulating further down the line should we find out that the deregulation isn't working in the best interests of our city?
I'm going to answer Councillor Brown's question first, because that's easier. Yes, you can. You can review the fleet at any time. You've got that provision within the Transport Act. So you would probably have to do an unmet demand to see if there was any unmet demand. before you could restrict again. But that's what happened in the graph between 90 and 90, or 1986. You can see where that's where we started issuing again, and then when we flattened, that's where the numbers were restricted again. As an officer's point of view, I don't necessarily think if you were to remove the quantity controls that you would see a great increase in the amount of licensed vehicles, because I don't know whether the demand for those services is there. But equally, the difficulty is with the type of vehicles that we need, because we need an accessible fleet of it's a form of public transport at the end of the day. If you don't retain a view in relation to wheelchair accessible vehicles, you would likely see a deterioration in those vehicles on the taxi or the taxi fleet if there was no requirement for proprietors to license those sorts of vehicles, which concurs obviously with the advice that Viv has given you. As a proposal, members, obviously I've got now the input with the Portsmouth Disability Advisory Group. Perhaps there's something that we can put together, some data that meets Councillor Brown's in specifically, that can say, well, people's expectations of being able to get a wheelchair accessible vehicle doesn't necessarily mean that we haven't got enough vehicles. It just means they might not be working at the time where, or their demands are stretched at the particular times when demand is high. Best practice is not to have it unless you can justify why a limit's necessary. So perhaps that's the avenue you want me to progress on. If you need to look at it, do we look at a report based on removal in line with the best practice guidance, and then that's a start of a process for you to get feedback?
Councillor Madrick.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm struggling with is oh, this is a horrible one, isn't it? What I'm struggling with, though, is that if we deregulate entirely, as you just said, there's no incentive for people to keep wheelchair accessible. And we did a motion through council, well, Labour with PIP actually did a motion through with council to actually add more wheelchair accessible vehicles on, or try and find a way of funding accessible vehicles. I know Councillor Gerarda and yourself, Chair, have been really proactive on that. And I think maybe deregulation is probably opposing what we want as a council to support the disability accessible vehicles. But equally on the other side, there's 46 licences just sitting on a table in the office, and we don't know if there's a market demand for them. So, and I don't know if this is even possible, but could we look at justifying keeping the conditions that we've currently got through the need of accessible vehicles, but release some of these 46 to the trade and see if there's, to non-wheelchair accessible vehicles, because that way we're still retaining the number of wheelchair accessible vehicles, but see if there is a market demand. That way, we're not really changing our policy entirely, but what we're doing is opening up the 40 passes that are sat in the office doing absolutely nothing, to see whether there is a market demand for them. After what Nikki just said, I would not be comfortable taking the cap off, because obviously that would destroy the wheelchair accessible industry, clearly, because as Viv said, why would there be any incentive for anybody to have a wheelchair accessible vehicle? So my question, I guess, now is could we go out to consultation, keeping the cap as it currently is, but releasing these 40 licences that are sat in the office for so long, and see what happens?
The difficulty I've got is that the plates or the vehicle licences that aren't currently in play are for wheelchair accessible vehicles. And I think it is the financial constraints on those types of vehicles that's influencing that depletion of the wheelchair accessible fleet. If you wanted to retain the quantity controls, you have to do the unmet survey demand. that's the criteria. If you want to retain it, you've got to undertake that survey, so whether there's any unmet demand can be established. By the fact that we've got vehicle licences in the office would suggest that initially, is there any unmet demand, because we're sitting with a proportion of the fleet not working and not licensed. And there's a cost implication for an unmet demand survey as well, which would be incumbent on the taxi trade itself.
Councillor Fazakerley.
Thank you. I mean, I'm trying to stick to this, but it's difficult sometimes to not branch away from what's something that Viv Young touched on when he spoke, and it's the frustration, I think, of how we've dealt with the taxi trade over the years. And I think back to 2014 when I was cabinet member for TNT, and I tried at the time to put through, well, I thought it was a fairly basic thing about using taxis in bus lanes. And here we are 12 years later, and that never really seems to advance very far at all. Thinking back those 12 years, there seemed to be a certain amount of resistance within the TNT department to actually doing that. But I think where I hold my hand up, I've been part of the administration for a while, that I think we've kind of let the taxi trade down in a way by not actually having a proper review of the impact and the benefits that taxis bring in this city. Viv's right, the bus trade gets an awful lot. Now, I know we have got government targets to meet. I know that buses are part of the public transport network, but so are taxis, and that's what I think it's been a constant source of frustration for me, that whatever administration seems to be in, it's never really addressed that as an issue. It's too much to expect licensing to do, because there is a divide between the two. Clearly, licensing has a responsibility when it comes to what we're talking about today, but it's a bit bigger than that. It goes across the area where I think TNT seriously needs to, or the council needs to authorise some formal view of how we treat the taxi trade. So while I'm not actually addressing what we're talking about at the moment, really, a little bit I am, but that's where I think we could definitely do a benefit. And if at some point this committee could make a recommendation through, or we raise something through full council, whatever, but I think that would go a long way to helping, because then we'd actually get a real input. I mean, a lot of us, I suspect, know what the taxi trade need. I don't think they ask for anything that's unreasonable. These guys have worked it for years. Most of us have lived in the city for years. You know, you can see it. So, but we never seem to have, for whatever reason, we never seem to have got over that hurdle. So that's all I had to say really on that point. But in regards to this, I'll go with the flow.
Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Chair. Nikki, I was wondering if you could let us know, have you had any prospective drivers asking or inquiring about the Hackney licences that you've then had to turn away because they are exclusively wheelchair accessible vehicle reserved licences?
No, we don't. We've not had any, not for some time, we haven't had any interest in acquiring Hackney Carriage vehicle licences.
Thank you.
I'm struggling to know what the committee are wanting.
I think the committee is struggling to know what the committee want too. That's why we pay you the big bucks, Chair. Come on.
I wish. Okay, maybe we've got two kind of recommendations on here, I guess. It's whether to consult on keeping the restrictions, or I'm guessing, or to not, basically, or to remove them. Nikki, just a confirmation, when this goes out for consultation, it's still got to come back to committee to decide whether to... Okay, so people that are asking for more information, that report would then have all of that on there?
Absolutely. This decision isn't what I was saying about the unmet demand survey. That would be separate. It's really, you're just asking for more. I'm getting the feeling from the committee you're asking for more feedback as to what's the current position, can that be movable, what would make it more palatable or maybe more attractive. and just perhaps, and obviously those persons affected, the Hackney carriage trade, maybe even the private hire trade, if they're being hindered from entering the Hackney trade, and obviously all the relevant accessibility groups that could perhaps greater inform you what are their needs, how are they not being met, how could they be met. Perhaps it's more of a overall view that the committee are asking for.
So everyone that's kind of, I suppose, at the minute it's just trying to decide which consultation to take. But either way, it's still got to come back here. It's then going to have all the information from both sides, from the trade and from the members of the public. And then they've got that information whether we can decide then whether to proceed or not. Does that make it a little bit easier? It's not fine. So it's now to decide whether we're going to formally consult for retaining the limits or to remove the limits. So now I suppose I'm going to need to do a vote. I guess it's going to be the best way to decide that. Normally I'd have Mr. Atchell here guiding me, but...
Well, you're going to need a proposer and a seconder for whichever one you want to go with, Chair.
Okay, does anyone want to propose either? Great, guys.
Without this looking to be a waste of members' time today, would you like a third option? As in, it's an open...
An open consultation would be much better and I think would fulfil everyone's needs. So
I propose an open consultation.
There we go.
And I second it.
Oh, whoa.
Everyone can second it.
I'm going to go with Councillor Swan because he was first up. So we're going to propose, formally proposed by Councillor Madgwick, seconded by Councillor Swan, to go out on consultation for both. I know that's more work, but are we all in agreement with that one? Okay, I've just got 3 other recommendations just to quickly go through. Notes and requirements of Section 16 of the Transport Act 1985 regarding limitation of Hackney carriage vehicle numbers. Yeah. Notes the DFT best practice guidance, which strongly advises against quantity controls unless clear evidence demonstrates they are necessary. Perfect. And now we're formally consulting with the Hackney carriage trade, other relevant bodies and organisations and members of the public on the preferred approach as determined. Perfect. I will now close today's meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.